From the sermons of the Reverend Samuel Davies, Sermon 9, the connection between present holiness and future felicity. Hebrews 12:14, follow holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. As the human soul was originally designed for the enjoyment of no less a portion than the ever-blessed God, it was formed with a strong innate tendency towards happiness. It has not only an eager fondness for existence, but for some good to render its existence happy. And the privation of being itself is not more terrible than the privation of all its blessings. It is true in the present degeneracy of human nature, this vehement desire is miserably perverted and misplaced. Man seeks his supreme happiness in sinful, or at best in created enjoyments, forgetful of the uncreated fountain of bliss, but yet still he seeks happiness. Still this innate impetus is predominant, and though he mistakes the means, yet he still retains a general aim at the end. Hence he ransacks this lower world in quest of felicity, climbs in search of it, the slippery ascent of honor hunts for it, and the treasures of gold and silver, or plunges for it in the foul streams of sensual pleasures. But since all the sordid satisfaction resulting from these things is not adequate to the unbounded cravings of the mind, and since the satisfaction is transitory and perishing, or we may be wrenched from it by the inexorable hand of death, the mind breaks through the limits of the present enjoyments and even of the lower creation, and ranges through the unknown scenes of futurity in quest of some untried good. Hope makes excursions into the dark duration between the present now and the grave, and forms to itself pleasing images of approaching blessings which often vanish in the embrace, like delusive phantoms. Nay, it launches into the vast unknown world that lies beyond the grave, and roves through the regions of immensity, after some complete felicity to supply the defects of sublunary enjoyments. Sublunary, that is everything under the moon. That's where we are here on earth. Hence, though men, till their spirits are refined by regenerating grace, have no relish for celestial joys, but pant for the poor pleasures of time and sense, yet as they cannot avoid the unwelcome consciousness that death will ere long rend them from these sordid and momentary enjoyments, are constrained to indulge the hope of bliss in a future state, and they can no longer enjoy any in this. And as reason and revelation unitedly assure them that this felicity cannot consist in sensual indulgences, they generally expect it will be of a more refined and spiritual nature, and flow more immediately from the great Father of spirits. He must indeed be miserable that abandons all hope of this blessedness. The Christian religion affords him no other prospect but that of eternal, intolerable misery in the regions of darkness and despair. And if he flies to infidelity as a refuge, it can afford him no comfort but the shocking prospect of annihilation. Now, if men were pressed into heaven by an unavoidable fatality, if happiness was promiscuously promised to them all without distinction of characters, then they might indulge a blind, unexamined hope, and never perplex themselves with anxious inquiries about it. And he might justly be deemed a malignant disturber of the repose of mankind that would attempt to shock their hope and frighten them with causeless scruples. But if the light of nature intimates and the voice of Scripture proclaims aloud that this eternal felicity is reserved only for persons of particular characters, and that multitudes who entertain pleasing hopes of it are confounded with an eternal disappointment and shall suffer an endless duration and the most terrible miseries, we ought each of us to take the alarm and examine the grounds of our hope, that, if they appear sufficient, we may allow ourselves a rational satisfaction in them. And if they are found delusive, we may abandon them, and seek for a hope which will bear the test now, while it may be obtained. And however disagreeable the task be to give our fellow creatures even profitable uneasiness, yet he must appear to the impartial a friend to the best interests of mankind, who points out the evidences and foundation of a rational and scriptural hope, and exposes the various mistakes to which we are subject in so important a case. And if, when we look around us, we find persons full of the hopes of heaven, who can give no scriptural evidences of them to themselves or others, if we find many indulging this pleasing delusion, whose practices are mentioned by God himself as the certain marks of perishing sinners. And if persons are so tenacious of these hopes that they will retain them to their everlasting ruin unless the most convictive methods are taken to undeceive them, then it is high time for those to whom the cares of souls of weightier charge than that of kingdoms is entrusted to use the greatest plainness for this purpose. This is my chief design at present, and to this my text naturally leads me. It contains these doctrines. First, that without holiness here, it is impossible for us to enjoy heavenly happiness in the future world. To see the Lord is here put for enjoying him. See Romans 8:24. And the metaphor signifies the happiness of the future state in general, and more particularly intimates that the knowledge of God will be a special ingredient therein. See a parallel expression in Matthew chapter 5, verse 8. Secondly, that this consideration should induce us to use the most earnest endeavors to obtain the heavenly happiness, pursue holiness, because without it, no man can see the Lord. Hence, I am naturally led, 1, to explain the nature of that holiness without which no man shall see the Lord, 2, to show what endeavors should be used to obtain it, and 3, to urge you to use them by the consideration of the absolute necessity of holiness.